Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to another GBSN cross-border webinar. This topic is business schools and the democratization of artificial intelligence with Professor Dr. Wim Naude, full professor in economics, and Dr. Jacques Ludik, founder and CEO of Cortex Group and Cortex Logic. Now, before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping tasks to go over with everybody. Everybody is muted, but we do recommend putting in all your questions, comments, and anything you would like to say in the chat. Feel free to welcome yourselves, and we will be answering those comments and questions towards the end of the session. And now at this time, I would like Professor Wim Naude and Dr. Jacques Ludik to start their videos and begin their presentations.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity and for the introduction, Maddie. And yes, so Jacques and I will share the presentation. I will start the first 10-15 minutes to set the scene, talking about business schools and the democratization of artificial intelligence. And then Jacques will continue. I will give kind of like a perspective on the current situation, a little bit also the past, and Jacques will continue with that and also give a future perspective. In all of this, we are very much at pains to provide some arguments and call for business schools to promote the democratization of artificial intelligence, and we'll explain what we mean by that and what business schools can do. But what we also like to do is to have a mix of both call it a scholarly or academic perspective on artificial intelligence, thinking a little bit about what it can do and what it should be doing, and thinking a little bit about, even some of the philosophical aspects behind that, but also a very practical overview and a practical approach. And this is also why Jacques is here today as somebody who is both an entrepreneur and a practitioner in the application of artificial intelligence. So we hope that it will be interesting to all of our business school communities out there. So let me start by first just laying some preliminaries. For some of you, this is, of course, very familiar, but just for those of you who are curious to learn also a little bit more about artificial intelligence, there are lots of definitions. There's no generally accepted definition, but I think a definition which most people in the field will agree with is that artificial intelligence relates to simulating human intelligence processes by machines, especially computer systems. So we would like our computers or our machines to learn, to reason, and to self-correct, to function as autonomous agents by themselves. The term itself was coined in 1956, although long before we had terms like robots and intelligent machines and automatives, automans, etc. Leonardo da Vinci famously made a drawing of an automated man, a robot, in the 1500s. Just after the 1956, at the conference in the US where the term was coined, an agenda was set out by the computer science, mathematics fields to develop artificial intelligence, going through it by symbolic AI. So this was a kind of like first type of AI to use computational logic, for instance, in expert systems. The AI that we have today is called probabilistic artificial intelligence. Is to be contrasted with the 1950s, 1960s agenda, which tried to be more type of Platonic in developing from logical rules and programs artificial intelligence, but rather to use data. And on this data to use machine learning techniques, which includes things like deep learning, random forest, and decision trees. And machine learning is just a method of taking, the big data revolution that we have seen in the last 15 to 20 years, and to teach computers and algorithms to identify patterns from the data and to predict things. So narrow AI, as it's also called today, is very narrow in the sense that using data, artificial intelligence is really good at doing two things. One is pattern recognition, like finding a needle in a haystack, and making a prediction based on data. And the thing is that, this large amount of data that's available, it's just, too difficult for the human brain to identify patterns and make predictions based on this masses of data. So these techniques are really cool techniques, really very good techniques of taking information from large amounts of data and doing that very quickly. I mean, computers work at speeds and processing power much faster and larger than what the human brain can manage. And that's what all of the revolution in AI in the last 10 years or so has been built on: pattern recognition and prediction. So if you have a job that requires a lot of pattern recognition and prediction, that's more likely to be perhaps automated by an artificial intelligence, by an algorithm. Now, just one thing to note as well is that this narrow AI is not really intelligent. So often people talk about artificial intelligence and then they refer to artificial general intelligence or a super intelligence. This is the stuff of science fiction. We don't yet have artificial intelligence that's even remotely as intelligent as humans are. And we are very far away, if ever, from a super intelligence. So this is the realm of science fiction, doesn't exist yet. It's not going to take over the world. There's no existential threat at the moment from a super intelligence. So we're not going to talk so much about super intelligence or AGI, artificial general intelligence, for now. I'm going to focus on this narrow AI, which consists of pattern recognition and prediction. And these are examples of pattern recognition and prediction that we see in all kinds of applications. So people have been really ingenious, taking data and algorithms and just applying pattern recognition, for instance, to computer vision. Computer vision that drives medical diagnostics, autonomous vehicles, cybersecurity surveillance is nothing else but predicting what is on the picture, what is on the photograph, what is on the camera. Predict whether it's a cat. It was the famous Google experiment of 2012. Took 12,000 computers to predict that it's looking at a cat. So you can see a car can predict if it's a person or if it is a traffic sign in the road. It can predict where the road is going. So it's all have to do with pattern recognition and prediction. The same with language processing, your autocomplete function, etc. It tries to predict what kind of words you are looking for or what you are searching for or what you are going to write. Spam filters try to predict whether it's a spam email or whether it's a legitimate email that you should read. The same with natural language processing, speech recognition that we have in Siri, again consists of recognizing patterns and predicting what kind of words are being used. So we see this also in fraud detection, in business intelligence. If your credit card is being used suspiciously, that pattern can be picked up by an algorithm and warn you in time that your credit card has been jeopardized its security. And we are also seeing that lots of scientists are using this now, for instance, in discovery, autonomous innovation, prototyping, looking at various combinations of molecules, etc., to find new types of materials. So this type of applications has been very impressive. And of course, it will have an impact on the economy and on society. And there's especially two areas that I want to highlight for now: promises and perils, and hype and hysteria. So promises and perils of AI. On the one hand, all of these abilities that we have seen from AI and so forth have created a lot of promise. So people can see this being pushed to a further limit where, for instance, people can stop doing dirty, dangerous, boring, dull type of jobs. We can automate these. We can let computers do this. We can create new products, new business models. We see all kinds of apps in the App Store now being based on data and on algorithms. We can use this to combat global warming. For instance, forest fires in Australia are being predicted using artificial intelligences. It can help us achieve the SDGs. There's been papers in Nature that explains how the SDGs can be reached by helping us through data and etc. It can be a general purpose technology which can in the end also help extend human life. We see a lot of applications in the health sector as well. But there are also dangers or perils involved with artificial intelligence. These we also know very much. It's also been, in the news, through deep fakes, through accidents, through fake news, misinformation, disinformation, especially now during the COVID pandemic. But we also are grappling with issues of data harvesting, privacy violations, the application of discriminatory type of algorithms that's based on bad data, cybercrime. In the worst case, we have examples of slaughter bots, autonomous lethal weapons that are much more deadlier than any weapons that have so far been produced. And then overall, in the bigger context, there are fears of the surveillance state and surveillance capitalism, that our privacy would disappear, and that we actually become the products for many companies, that our data being used and our attention is really what it's all about. So we do have these positive aspects, but also the negative aspects. So if data is the new oil, it can also be toxic if indeed mishandled. Now, there's also hype and hysteria. So partly because of the perils and partly because of the promises, there has been, what I call this hyperbole and hysteria. And I talked about this at the previous GSBN seminar, so I'm not going to go into greater detail on this. But generally, people have been hyperboling the artificial intelligence. So it's being hyped up to great more expectations of what it can do than I think is really at this stage realistic. On one hand, we've had the CEO of Google making the proclamation that AI is the most important thing humanity has ever worked on. Now, of course, he will say that because his business model is based on artificial intelligence. We have also had, for instance, the transhumanism movement. People like Ray Kurzweil are talking about the singularity. And there's a lot of people that believe by 2045, we will actually have the singularity where we will start merging with machines and we'll go into cyberspace and we will live forever. So this kind of like what I think is the exaggerated effects of AI. It's not going we're not going to have a singularity soon. And AI is not at the moment the most important thing that we have worked on. In terms of hysteria, there has been this robot effect that the robots are coming for your job. And again, we haven't seen this materialize. There's good reasons why AI is not having massive job losses, as a consequence. Indeed, surveys in Europe have shown that automation, at least through other types of robots, have created more jobs than it has destroyed. And then finally, Elon Musk, in again, one of his tweeting moods, he tweeted that the race for AI will cause World War III. Again, there is competition for AI, but again, as I show in other presentations and work, we don't really see this. There's very few really big companies and governments with enough funding, etc., to push the race for AI. So this is not something that I think we should also be concerned about. But certainly, and this is also my call here, is that business schools has an important role as well to play down the hype and hysteria, to find a much more realistic, type of perspective and message, for their stakeholders, because partly the hyperbole has led to a lot of startup activity in Europe being so-called based on AI. So if a startup wants funding, it claims that it's doing something on AI. And surveys have found that, for instance, 40–50% of startups who claim that they are in AI are actually nothing in AI. So we should be aware that that this is something that can be used to try and influence venture capitalists, to try and tell them, look, we're the next Airbnb or the next Reddit or the next Uber. And that this leads to a lot of bubbles being blown up as far as I'm concerned with data and data science and AI. So the point is that machines are still very, very stupid. As Jan LeCun, one of the leading scientists in AI, have said himself, the smartest AI systems today have less common sense than a house cat. And as we know, maybe house cats are in fact quite intelligent. Now, how can business schools play a bigger role in terms of democratization of AI? Why is democratization of AI important? And this is what Jacques and I will do in the rest of this webinar. So there's 3 points that I want to make, 3 areas where business schools can help. One is with the diffusion of AI, one is with the incentivization of AI ethics, and one is with green AI. I think if these 3 aspects can be more embedded in the work of business schools, it will make a contribution to democratize AI, to make AI much more readily an instrument that more and more people can benefit from, that we can see more of these promises of AI actually be achieved. So the first is the diffusion of AI. So if AI doesn't diffuse, it will not live up to its promises. And the slow diffusion in AI, we can actually see in the fact that productivity growth in the West is really very slow. We don't see the AI diffusion really picking it up. You see there's also in difference growth between firms. You've got about 5% of firms that are growing very fast, good productivity growth, but 95% not really. And this is because despite what we think about, AI being ubiquitous in our, maybe in our mobile phones, it's really that it's not sweeping the world. AI is not in all industries, in all companies. Small companies find it very difficult for reasons I'll explain. So as Brian Bergstein said in the MIT Technology Review, AI is very costly and the payoffs are often very modest. So how slow is AI diffusion? There's a number of surveys in the last couple of years, and I'll be brief about them. In general, what they show here is that, for instance, the International Data Center found about a 20% diffusion rate. Accenture found a 15% diffusion rate. The Gartner CIO survey found about an 18%. It actually found that 72% of the companies they surveyed had no applications in use. And we also saw that the automotive industry actually had a decrease in the number of automobiles and auto industries that are adopting artificial intelligence. So at least from survey data, we get also a confirmation of the slow productivity growth data that AI is not really diffusing very fast. The other reason why it's not diffusing fast is what I always share with my students as well. Classic paper in 1957 by the economist V. Grealish, which is called, and I always refer to Grealish as scorn. He asked himself the question in 1957, why don't farmers in the United States adopt state-of-the-art seeds in their farming? Because they will be much better for productivity, much better, etc. And the simple reason was that for the adoption of these different corn varieties, it just didn't make sense. It's not a question that farmers were asking themselves, what can the technology, the new seed do, but how much will we benefit from investing in it? And I think it's the same as in 1957 with Grealish's corn example in the US, that many businesses are asking themselves not what can AI do or how cool or what a great shining object AI is, but how much will we benefit from investing in it? And the question is that it's at the moment for most firms not such a good benefit. So two reasons for this is that firstly, access to data and data scientists is out of reach of many firms, especially small firms, SMEs. You need perhaps a data scientist with a PhD, and data is very difficult to get by. If you're a small firm, you don't have access to data. At the same time, as we see from this graph from the OECD, the cumulative number of data regulations since 1972 has increased almost exponentially, almost as the salaries of data scientists. So this is a significant barrier to entry. There's many other problems that I share you with data, with availability, with the transformation process, the silos, the data quality, the algorithmic quality. So, all researchers, data scientists preparing and developing AI will tell you that a large amount of time is spent on data extraction, cleaning, normalizing, and wrangling data. And a very small portion is actually running the algorithm. So in sum, diffusion depends on the benefits and accessibility. And I think that business schools can do more to look at the, helping firms get the benefits and also doing something with the accessibility. And I'll say something more how that can be done later. The other part is the incentivization of AI ethics. So there's been many calls made that there should be specific ethics for everybody using AI. So the European Union famously has this code of conduct, and many other organizations as well. So this has really led to what is called, calls for AI governance, for human-centered AI, ethical AI, and responsible AI. This tells you that there's really great concerns in the world about these possible pitfalls and possible perils attached to artificial intelligence. So human-centered AI is what's today, I would say this is about, the standard, and it refers to ethical AI and responsible AI to ensure that you have machines that are aligned in their behavior and are serving human users in an ethical way, that are, also fair and responsible. So it doesn't harm people, it doesn't discriminate against subgroups, and it fulfills human concerns. So in other words, it must be aligned to human interests. That's the basic, I would say, gist of AI ethics at this stage. And we have seen this in a number of initiatives, so cross-country initiatives to promote AI ethics. We have seen that in the Asilomar principles, the EU's ethics guidelines, the OECD's principles. The G20 also has its human-centered AI principles, and the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers have a very extensive document on ethically aligned design principles. There's also a country-level initiative. The European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights lists more than 290 AI policy initiatives in individual EU member states from 2016 onwards. And when we see now increasingly also corporates, big corporates coming out with their own AI ethics codes. For instance, Continental in 2020 released its own AI ethics code. So we see on a country level, cross-country level, global level, and also on a corporate level, increasing attention on AI ethics codes. And we see this also in terms of research. If we look at, for instance, the number of paper titles now mentioning ethnic keywords, you can see how quickly that has increased. So this is an hot topic, which of course business schools cannot ignore. One reason why it should not be ignored is coming back again to the challenge of diffusing AI. With ethical AI, people will trust it, and it will lead to increased use of AI. It will also help firms to avoid costly mistakes, which will help them to, with less risk and less chance of costly mistakes and accidents, will also help them to uptake and implement AI. So in a sense, ethical AI, human-centered AI, is a way of getting people to get the benefits of AI. So if we look at these promises of AI, we will not get this if people don't trust AI, if they cannot use AI, if it's going to cause accidents, if it's going to be misused, if it's going to cause problems, then that will mitigate against using this type of technology. It will mitigate against this diffusion, and hence we will find that the benefits of AI will not be reaped. So what can business schools do? Now, I summarize these type of human-centered AI principles generally have 5 type of principles. Beneficence, in other words, to try and do good, to increase human happiness and welfare. Non-maleficence, in other words, not to do anything bad. And autonomy, not to interfere with human autonomy, so humans still remain autonomous, and to maintain justice, in other words, not to discriminate or not to be used for foul purposes. Now, these first 4 principles are very similar to bioethics. You find it in bioethics for a long period of time, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Simply look at what has been happening in bioethics. We don't have problems with all kinds of bio warfare, etc., because we are monitoring this, and there are principles and ways to deal with it. But the one that is different with AI is explicability, and this refers to the black box problem. So within machine learning, deep learning algorithms and neural networks, you have the inputs of data and you have the outputs in terms of the decision of the algorithm. And humans don't often understand why this output comes about as it comes about. It's difficult to explain. It's called the black box problem. Now, if you have data bias and you have lack of explainability, then you will have inequality in application as a consequence. And AI will then not benefit everyone equally or fairly. So the explicability is a special problem attached to AI ethics, which I think more should be done as well in terms of what business schools can do to promote the explicability of AI within AI ethics. So finally come to green AI, and I'll be very short on this. What very few people realize is that really training a big AI model is very bad for the environment, in the sense that the training a large deep learning model has the same carbon footprint as the lifetime of 5 American cars, including gas. So here we can see this from this paper by Struble et al. In 2019. They trained one model on a GPU, and they calculated the number of CO2 emissions as 626,000 tons or pounds, compared to 126,000 pounds CO2 emissions from a car in its lifetime. So you can see how that is really what it's called red AI, to contrast it with green AI. Now, what we really need as well, thinking about the ethics of AI and the adoption of AI throughout the economy and the diffusion, you really don't want to diffuse an instrument or a tool that's really putting so much consequences in terms of CO2 and energy use. So what has been recommended is so-called green AI, which at least 2 principles would be for developers of AI models to report the number of floating point operations required to generate a result. So if you build a model, you try that model to be as accurate as possible, to predict or to recognize a pattern very accurate. And and that requires a large number of floating point operations, but the floating point operations is linked to the energy use. So you can link the energy use and get the energy footprint of your model from the FPUs. But this isn't very much reported by people building models. The second point is that there should be a mandatory releasing of pre-trained models publicly as far as possible, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You shouldn't be, you should save others the time and the cost of retraining a lot of models. And then finally, I think for the fundamental research, if we think about the human brain with all its calculations, it's very energy efficient. Human brain doesn't need a lot of energy to do this. If you compare it to the energy needs of our AI, we're really not often comparing, apples with apples. It's easy to say that, you have a Deep Blue beating a human master in chess or in Go, but you're not comparing like with like. You have one kind of tool that uses a huge amount of energy compared to the human brain that uses a very negligible amount of energy. So if we focus more on green AI, we could move in a cognitively more plausible direction, with the human brain. So if we define artificial intelligence as trying to mimic human level intelligence or human intelligence, one part of that would be energy efficiency as well. So this is the question is, what can business schools do? And so I want to argue that in terms of the diffusion of AI, there could be more being done in business schools on business model innovation, because centrally to the business model is whether AI creates benefits for you as a company or not. And part of that as well is access to data. And that requires a greater understanding, I think, of the economics and regulation of data. With the incentivization of AI ethics, there are always ethical guidelines, but there's very little incentive for companies to adhere to them. And here I think business schools can play a role also in terms of information to downplay hype and hysteria, to discuss the importance of AI governance for the diffusion and adoption of AI in the interest of the business, and to emphasize and look at new ways of explainability of AI. And then finally, for green AI, we need much more fundamental, but also interdisciplinary research, but also industry, government, and business school collaboration. One reason is that very few universities, at least in Europe, have the same kind of capacities and computing facilities as the big corporates to actually train and experiment and work on deep learning and AI models. Universities just don't have the budget or the time, as for instance, Google or Amazon or Apple would have to do this. And we need much more resources to be able to do this type of basic research in universities to democratize artificial intelligence. So this is just examples of what business schools can do. There's a lot of new things going on, and I'm arguing here for the interdisciplinary working in business schools with, for instance, engineers, with software engineers specifically, with scientists working on neuroscience. So we could do deep learning with less data. There are interesting examples that I show on this slide. Also with explainable AI, there are new types of models that are being developed that I think, if business schools also bring this out to students looking at the way to commercialize this, to put this into business models, we can make much faster progress, in my view, with things like explainable AI. And then also with things like alignment problem, aligning human interest with that of an AI in terms of what they call reward modeling. These are also examples of where in the technical solutions, there is a lot of promise and progress, but for these to be actually applied and to be diffused, you need to actually embed these and make a business model from that, where they can be brought to market and where they can be diffused and be scaled up, and where they can be refined as well. And I think that is what business schools, as the interface between business and entrepreneurship and the scholarly community, can do. So there's some extra on the slides, further reading. Some of the some of the slides have been taken from some of these papers that I've been working on in the recent past. So these are there for your reference. I think the slides will be made available as well, so you can follow up and read about this at your own leisure at some time later. So on this note, I want to thank you very much and give over now to Jacques to continue and also give us a little bit of a future perspective on democratizing artificial intelligence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wim. Okay, Wim, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Without further ado, let me start straight away. Yeah, Wim, I think what you've just done is a great sense making. For me, democratizing artificial intelligence to benefit everyone is very much a sense-making journey as well, and I like what you've done with that presentation, because it's really a synthesis and sense-making in terms of what does democratizing AI mean. For me, it's on the benefits. Well, the one thing is the use, but there's also the benefits. How can we share that benefits to as many people as possible? So I'll do a bit of a deep dive into that as well. Just very briefly, my massive transformative purpose in business and the things that I'm doing is shaping a better future in the smart technology era, and wanting business and society to thrive. And that's what I'm busy with my companies, cortexlogic and Cortex Group, as well as a non-profit organization called the Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa, where we try to also focus on transforming Africa through smart technology. And then Sapiens, I'll talk more about this in the talk. There's also a specific, there's more details there. I'm not going to go through all the slides, so the slides will be given us as a handout as well. Brief background in terms of just myself. I've been fortunate to be in the AI field my whole career. I didn't know, Wim talks about the hype and hysteria. Didn't know it's going to be like this eventually. My first AI company, Ceasing Systems, was kind of during the winter period, still late 90s, 99, probably say early 2000s. But I started off at Stellenbosch University. I did my postgrad, my PhD also in artificial intelligence, focused quite a bit on recurrent neural nets, training dynamics, complexity of recurrent neural networks, and then also focused quite a bit on applications. And one area of application during that time was, the book is also called Neural Networks and Psychopathology, where we applied neural network models to brain disorders, OCD, for instance, or schizophrenia, etc. But I realized there's tremendous value to unlock just with the narrow AI that Wim is referring to. And that's why I started a company called Ceasing Systems. That was the first AI company on the African continent that was sold to a multinational, in this instance, General Electric. And GE was still a major company in the 2000s. And I sold that company eventually to GE in 2011. But that experience, the word ceasing then GE, was for me an immense learning experience as well, to see how AI can be applied across the globe in multiple industries. So it was invaluable to see in practice how you can use AI and data to make a difference. And it's not just AI, it was always sensors and instrumenting the world as well, especially if you think about the industrial world. The industrial world was always more instrumented than the consumer-facing world. Things have changed now. We've got smartphones, we've got sensors. I'm wearing an Apple Watch. So there's all these wearables. So people are being instrumented. So it changes the ball game, incredible amount of potential and value to unlock. Briefly, I did a stint with Jumo as well in Africa, or emerging markets, where we've leapfrogged with specific applications around financial inclusion, microloans, and making that available to on feature phones in emerging markets, and incredible opportunity to also application of AI, where we actually look at the mobile wallet behavior and look at the call direct records and then infer risk from that as well, and affordability and those type of things as well. Since all of that, I founded the cortexlogic as a next generation AI company that became part of the Cortex Group. I also founded the African AI community called Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa. And then I'm currently on the board of a few organizations, especially in Africa, where we're trying to diffuse AI as well and make sure we spread and build capacity. And right now, I've just recently published a book called Democratizing Artificial Intelligence to Benefit Everyone. It's also talking about shaping a better future in a smart technology era. And I reference some of these use cases over my career as well, and just sharing some of that as well. So without further ado, so if I talked about the book specifically, I talk about the fourth industrial revolution, or actually I call it the smart technology era, because it's not just industrial, it's obviously a digital revolution that's feeding off industrial revolution, and even the industrial revolutions is feeding off the digital now. So basically, we're sitting in a very interesting space where we see the fusion of a number of exponential technologies, of which artificial intelligence is one. And there's blockchain technology, there's biotech, there's nanotech, there's quantum computing. There's so many things that's making incredible impact. But basically, that is blurring the lines between the physical, the digital, and biological world. And it's impacting all disciplines, economies, and industries, and even challenging us or challenging ideas about what it means to be human, which is for me great, because if you think about, we want to be more human-centric, and I will be talking more about that. And if technology can be smart enough to support us in that role and to figure out what we should be doing and doing less robotic and tedious work, that could be just a good thing. But we need to be smart how we do this. So this particular slide is just emphasizing the fact that the smart technology revolution will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, play, and interact and relate to one another. And it's going to be all-inclusive and wide-ranging. And the impact and what I'm doing in the book, even if one thinks, oh, it's not really that impactful and so forth, when you go through the book, I'm laying a foundation and talking about the disruptive and profound impact of not just AI, but I'm talking about smart technology. It's almost like artificial intelligence is a proxy for some of these exponential technologies, and they're all interplay. They all feed off one another. AI needs data. Data is created by instruments. So what we see is that in every industry, in every country, even if you're in the third world countries, you are being affected. And we're seeing entire systems of production, management, and governance being transformed. And there's blockchain technology that obviously supports decentralization. So in front of our eyes, we see these kind of things. This was actually a graph from SoftBank and just the way they're thinking about the world. If you think about business value unlocking on the y-axis, and you think about, you look at the x-axis, it's time, you can see the impact of certain industries over time. And it started with the agriculture, fishery, metals, and then built on top of that, you see the industrial, financial world also contributing to business value unlocking. And then 1995, you can see the internet era and the massive impact, and still the massive impact and growing impact relative to even the industrial and financial industries. But what you're also seeing here is AI, and that could just be a proxy for smart technology. We entered the era where the internet has also helped to create a nervous system effectively for humanity and civilization. And we are more instrumented. So there's the possibilities now with unlocking value from data and from this interconnectedness, this hyperconnected world is tremendous. And my hope is that we use it in smart ways. So the other thing that I wanted to say is, even if you think about diffusion, slow, and so forth, there's a lot of things that play off one another. There's a number of exponential curves, and they are probably also most of them are, pretty much all of them are sigmoidal, but they are feeding off on top of one another, interfacing. And there's a bunch of technologies which makes it an incredible toolbox to unlock incredible value. If you think about just two things, like blockchain and artificial intelligence, and you think about AI, decentralized autonomous organizations, and the governance, that could be dangerous, even in a narrow sense. Forget about super intelligence and so forth, even in a narrow sense. There is some very, very powerful technology and so forth. So you see the speed of technology change in the smart technology era. And in the book, I talk about just a metaphor that talks about a runaway train, for instance. So basically, I communicate here, it is extremely dangerous times where it's critical to think on our feet and make the right choices to not only save our lives and get control of the situation, but also shape a better future for all of humanity. And it is urgent. So the reason I'm saying it's urgent as well, even from Wim's slides, you see he talks about the perils as well. And he listed, I think, a lot of the same things. So what I'm arguing for, and I've got specific chapters dealing with this, we are on a problematic trajectory, and we struggle with sense making. It's almost like we're like kids in a candy store with social media and smart technology, and we see the deep fakes and all these kind of things, and people with different opinions and so forth. So we struggle with sense making. We struggle with meaning making. We see there's lots of suicides or mental health issues. From a cortex side, just by the way, we are focused on AI-driven platforms that are focusing on financial and also specifically health wellness. And we actually bring out applications for teenage mental health and young adult mental health as well, where we use AI in smart ways to provide solutions, personalized solutions that actually makes a difference. Other big one is and that's why I'm also, you can't just look at smart technology in isolation. So you've got to think about the big picture. You've got to contextualize things. So if you think about what's happening, the wealth gaps, the potential job loss, we see that's not necessarily happening, as Wim has also said, but there's still issues here. And there is a concern around that because AI will come for creative jobs as well. The other thing is catastrophic risks, discrimination, data abuse, bias, human agency. I think it's a big fear about state surveillance, and also if you think about capitalism surveillance as well. I'll talk more about that also. But dependence lock-in, we want our freedom. We don't want to be locked in. Institutional decay is a problem. Disorder, destabilization of society is a problem. So what we need is visionary leadership and collective sense-making, wisdom, practical actions to ensure that humanity and our civilization is moving in the right direction as we work towards unlocking the tremendous potential of AI and other smart technologies. And what I'm doing in the book, I'm talking just 2 slides briefly summarizing that. It's a holistic sense-making journey. And first of all, it lays a foundation to synthesize a more balanced view and a better understanding of AI, its applications, its benefits, its risks, its limitations, its progress, and its likely future paths. So I've got a specific chapter that just deals with limitations, progress, and future paths, even looking at state of the art, what is really happening on that kind of level. And it helps with that sense making that Wim was talking about. Wim just made some statements because of obviously the report, his interpretation as well in terms of what he reads and what's his assessment. But what I do in the book is to really look at different opinions and then strongman the opinions, or steelmanning the opinions as well, and trying to understand if there's good points. So it's a synthesis, and it assimilates and acts as a filter on a wide spectrum of thought leadership, information, ideas, and helps people to interpret and make sense of this. And for me, it's very important that we want people, when we talk about democratizing AI, I'm actually talking about not just the businesses and so forth, and governments and so forth, but the people as well. How can we turn this on our heads that not only the tech giants is getting all the benefits of smart technology? How can we get to a world where we address the wealth gap, where we use AI to help people live more meaningful lives? And I'm going to briefly talk about that as well. So we want to create that better future for ourselves, our children, and humanity going forward. So it's really helping to understand where we are heading. And given the current dynamics, the global and national economic and political level, as well as ideologies and industries. And then I think we need to be realistic. You've got to think about what is the possible potential negative impacts. And then we need to be very practical in how to address that. So we need to design AI for social good and beneficial outcomes. And we need to build a human-compatible AI that's ethical and trustworthy. That's all stuff that Wim also talked about. We need to address bias and discrimination, and we need to think about a human-centric, AI-driven workplace because it's coming, and we need to engineer that in the right way. And this particular slide is just talking now about some specific solutions as well. So for me, it's almost like a summary word just to say democratizing AI. If you look at what Wim has done there, he's fleshed it out in terms of those 3 aspects. And that resonates with me, all of that. I think there's more dimensions to that as well, as if you read the book as well. I think we also need to think about where we're going. So I think it's important that we also figure out what does it mean to be human and living meaningful in the 21st century. And I'm sharing some ideas for reshaping our civilization for beneficial outcomes, as well as various potential outcomes for the future of civilization, because things can go wrong easily. So I'm doing two things. So there's a massive transformative purpose for humanity that complements the United Nations 2030 vision and sustainable development goals to help shape the beneficial human-centric future in a decentralized, hyper-connected world. And then there is specific action, the specific solution that I'm proposing is just a building block in support of this purpose and goals, which I call Sapiens, which is a decentralized, human-centric, user-controlled, AI-driven super platform that pretty much empowers people on an individual level, community level, family level, smart towns, smart cities, city-state kind of level as well. Okay, so proposed massive transformative purpose for humanity, basically evolving a dynamic, emphatic, prosperous, thriving, and self-optimizing civilization that benefits everyone in sustainable ways and in harmony with nature. And what I did in the book, I talked about, I've categorized it into four things: on a systems level, and then on a quantity level, a quality level, and a place level. And if you think about the systems level, it's really about driving beneficial outcomes for all lives through decentralized, adaptive, and agile economic and social governance systems that reward active participation and positive contribution to society and civilization, but also help to keep peace and protect humanity from any potential harm in elastic ways. We need to have that balance. And we got to respect individual freedom and privacy. That's why I'm afraid of digital dictatorships. We got to be very careful, because this could easily happen. Then from a quantity perspective, we need to use democratic knowledge, science, smart technology, AI in optimal human-centric ways that are based on wisdom, good values, and ethics to dynamically solve problems and create opportunities and abundance and share the benefits with everyone. And this is absolutely possible to do if we are smart about how we do things. And then the third one is very important for me, because we are humans. We want quality of life. We realize we're social beings. Community building is super important. What I really feel that's lacking, even on a school level, educational level, is virtues and character strength development. We can use AI to also support, almost like an AI assistant, AI companion that supports people in this as well. Sense making. I think people struggle with sense making. Standard of living is obviously, there's lots of gaps, well-being and meaningful living of everyone. And then finally, with consideration of the best possible livable habitat, Earth, other living organisms, the environment, and our place in the universe. So if I look at the first one, I already covered some of the key things here. So I'm not going to say too much about that. So what I do have here is, when I look at, say, a systems level, I've identified 5 different goals that complement the United Nations goals. And I'm arguing for, obviously, a decentralized, adaptive, agile economic and social governance systems. And I'm talking about Pareto-topia type of world. You can read the book for more details there, where you can maximize beneficial future for as many people as possible, with many protopian elements and in harmony with nature. The second goal is really around how we can create more local, more human city-state civilization. And talking about that, where the democracy is more elastic and dynamic, and you've got social structures that are more polycentric and polyarchic in elements. And I do have some details around this, so I just want to give you a very high-level idea. So goal 3 is looking at positive, uplifting, compassionate, human-centric society, associated incentives that complement and extend the current evolving workplace by rewarding active participation and positive contributions to society and civilization. We got to think about that. There's work, but there's how do we reward people for positive contribution to society? What does that look like? And then goal 4 is really, we want to make sure that, and I think Ray Dalio talks about quite a bit about this in his books and on LinkedIn, as founder of one of the biggest hedge funds in the world. we need to look at capitalism, a more robust, resilient, responsive, dynamically fine-tuned, controlled form of capitalism to drive sustainable economic growth in an open-ended fashion and maximize benefit to all stakeholders. And there's all sorts of thoughts also on infinite game dynamics, where the aim is more to perpetuate games in the broader sense of the word and limit rivalry where possible, and only have finite game dynamics and limited forms of rivalry where it makes sense to do so. So this is obviously could be controversial, but that is something to look at. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the details, but I do comment on this SDGs, which I think is very good, and also the 2030 vision of United Nations. So there's some very specific comments. There's also some academic leadership people that I've quoted that I've worked with, that's also that I've also worked into the book as well. Just very briefly, if you think about the second one, we obviously want to use knowledge, science, and smart technology in smart ways, ethical ways, with wisdom, good values, and human centricity to create those opportunities, share the benefits with everyone, dynamically solve problems. And then there's specific goals around that as well. And you can see what kind of SDGs also fits in with that. Then I think meaningful living, quality of life is very important. So again, Maslow's hierarchy of motivational model comes into play. And I think it's important to look at this. Why don't we help and support people, use technology for people to live more meaningful? And you got to think about this kind of framework of things, where you not only think about the Maslow thing, but you also think about character building, wisdom, justice, humanity, courage, temperance, self-actualization, all those kind of things as well. And we want to give each child the opportunity to maximize quality of life, character building, sense making, well-being, meaningful living. So it's not just giving them proper knowledge and giving them certain skills. The skills should be on the character level, sense-making level as well, and well-being level. So that's why we're bringing out an application that's focused on supporting teenagers on mental health. And if we are better equipped, we can use technology to actually make a difference there. Okay, so there's specific goals around that, and I'm not, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too much further detail. And the last one is around making Earth a truly more livable habitat. We know about climate change and a bunch of things around that. We obviously want to make sure that we create that better environment. So the goal 13 and 14 is really around that, make Earth a truly more livable habitat for humanity and as many life forms as possible, and reduce our dependence on animal life for food and any unhealthy processed food and so forth. And for 14 is make life multiplanetary, and I'm sure Elon Musk will like that. But I think there's some great potential to be smart about how we do things, but we need to figure things out here on Earth. So we've got a huge responsibility in terms of that. And then in just the last stuff in terms of specific solutions. So I'm proposing a Sapiens, a human-centric, user-controlled, AI-driven super platform that makes use of smart technology and kind of just as a showcase of what can be done. So if we just imagine where you've got the super platform and you've got personalized AI agents that not only empower individuals and monetizes their data and services, but can also be extended to families, virtual groups, companies, communities, city-states, etc., to create that framework. So why Sapiens? So first of all, we need kind of tools that embrace this massive transformative purpose for humanity and its goals. We need to look at addressing this huge gap in the market and society where there's currently no global solution of this nature at scale that makes life easier and more optimized for the user. It's a very fragmented ecosystem, apps and platform business ecosystem, especially in the West. We see less so in China, but still. And then obviously the problem is if you've got these kind of platforms that are manipulated by state actors, then that's going to be also a problem. So you got to make sure it's decentralized and people do have control. So there's no solution where the user has full control of their own data with proper privacy and governance without being exploited or controlled or manipulated in some way, as we've seen with social media, as we've seen with recommendation engines that are basically engineered to serve the purposes of AI-driven platform plays for businesses as well. So the users also do not have their own personalized AI agents that work for them and help to optimize their life. There's no global solution that helps users to monetize their own data and services for their own benefit or people that they want to benefit, or for society more broadly. And there's no agents for the broader picture. If you think about smart families and so forth, groups, companies, smart towns. And finally, you can also have AI agents that optimize the connections between network people that live within structures and even connections across these hierarchical structures. So I'm talking about that. Defining sapiens for the individual user, where I'm looking at my data, my AI assistant, my digital connections, and then you can see the specific things that this agent can assist you with. Lifelong learning, life-wide learning, sense making, helping to monetize data and services. That's it. There are already applications out there, even browsers, that's trying to make sure that some of the advertising money is going to the individual user. So there's already examples of these kind of things. So we can engineer these kind of solutions. Anyway, so there's more detail here. So I'm just going to quickly go on to the next one. So obviously it functions within a multi-sector digital ecosystem. And then you can look at what does it look like for a community? Just imagine you've got AI assistant that where you've got communities instrumented, you've got lots of people instrumented, you've got equipment, you've got systems, infrastructure instrumented, and now you can start optimizing on that level as well. You can obviously do this on a business level. I think in the future, even for companies, and we've done this for some of the biggest corporates, we would not only apply AI to help optimize their key performance indicators in terms of just throughput, yield, quality, for instance, in the industrial world, but also the demand side. So you can build if you instrument all parts of the business, you can do simulations and build models on that level as well. So there's incredible opportunities to use that type of thing also as we instrument on different levels, on community level, for instance, as well. So here I'm just giving the community view of that. But then just to think about in terms of monetization here. So you can monetize via advertising, selling of anonymized data and services, subscriptions, transactions. And you can have people benefiting, or businesses or service providers that's all connected in this world. And then you can even have this with smart cities, smart communities. And you can have, again, this is where I believe blockchain technology plays an incredibly important role. And I'm quite excited about what's happening in that ecosystem, where you can include smart contract-based services within this hyper-connected networks, and each entity has its own data and AI system, and they can engage, and they can have smart contracts that does various things. So this is definitely futuristic. But this is the world we live in. Remember, we see this exponential changes. We are going to be surprised because we see time as linear, and we will be surprised by some of these kind of things happening. So if we can engineer things to create that better future using smart technologies, this is what I'm trying to communicate here as well. And I think the last slide on this, I'm just bringing it together, how Sapiens is a vehicle that supports the MTP for humanity and helps to implement many aspects of the MTP goals. And I'm just talking about imagining the world where you see this working. So I'm talking a little bit about that. I'm just going to go to the next slide. So the next slide is actually showing how an AI assistant or our Sapiens could support various goals as well. And it can do this on an individual level, but can also do this on a community level. So you can have a look at that. Then the rest of the book, and I'm not going to do this, is almost like an appendix. So that's why I'm getting close to the top of the hour. So we want to leave time for questions. But I do have some really relevant, interesting stuff here, because what I did here was just to, and I'll leave this because you will have the handouts. In here, you will see a bit more information about the various things. So what I did in the book was I'm creating the smart technology era, setting that foundation, just talking about why we say we are in the smart technology era. And then I'm talking about AI as exponential technology in this era. And then from a business school perspective, if I'm actually going into AI-driven digital transformation of the business enterprise. I've been doing this for many years, helping businesses thrive, and it's the whole spectrum. Obviously, we focus a lot on corporates and in big enterprises, but there are ways that smaller businesses can use AI as well. And there's some things, I'm giving some specific examples. And then the next few chapters is really focused on AI revolutionizing personalized engagement for consumer-facing business. You can almost look at the world consumer-facing and industrial. In the industrial side, it's process and equipment enhancement. And then I also specifically highlight, because it's obviously close to my heart, because I think it's very important, is ultra-personalized, AI-enabled education, precision healthcare, and wellness. So that's a huge focus from a business side for us. But I also then, and Wim has already also talked about the impact on society and the perils and benefits. So I'm going into the impact on society, governments and public sector, the debates, the AI debates. There's a fascinating chapter on that, progress and likely future paths of AI. But then I'm going, this is all a foundation for the beneficial outcomes for humanity. And I'm going to more details there, and then talking about what does it mean to democratize AI to help shape a better future. And then I'm talking about sapiens. So that's kind of a summary. I'm not going to go too much further detail. This is all things that I do cover in the book. And I think Wim has already given kind of an overview on specifically the benefits as well. So I wanted to talk about AI's impact on society. But this is pretty much things that you also covered on a high level. But you can read the book. You can also look at the slides where I talk about these kind of things. And I think it's very important to make sense of the risks, but also the benefits for society and social good. And I maybe want to end with this, just two quotes, the one from Max Tegmark, which I've also collaborated with, president of the Future of Life Institute, where he said, everything we love about civilization is a product of intelligence. So amplifying our human intelligence with AI has the potential of helping civilization flourish like never before, as long as we manage to keep the technology beneficial. And then Klaus Schwab talked about smart technology era, and he said we can enjoy more freedom, better health, higher levels of education, and more opportunities to live the lives they value, while suffering less from insecurity and economic uncertainty. So the new technology, if shaped in a responsive way as well, could catalyze a new cultural renaissance that will enable us to feel part of something much larger than ourselves, a true global civilization. But the risk is we can roboticize humanity, or we can say, let's lift humanity into a new collective and moral consciousness based on a shared sense of destiny. That's why it's so important to create this massive transformative purpose, talk about a vision, give context to what we're doing with smart technology. And that's what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to end with that. So thank you very much. Open to questions as well. You can look at the slides and we can take it from there.
Hi, Jacques. There are just, I think, one or two questions that I think we'll have time to answer. The first is, how do we ensure true democratization of AI by not leaving the developing world behind? In places like Africa, we suffer from a huge infrastructure gap and some of the worst broadband penetration rates.
Absolutely. So for me, that is a good question, because I'm right here. I'm here in Cape Town, South Africa. I'm very well connected with people that are making a difference and trying to create unicorns here. I'm optimistic about what we are doing here, but I'm also concerned because of the fast pace of how things move. We do see that there needs to be leapfrogging happening here. So we do have examples of financial inclusion, mobile wallets, where we see a bit of that, but that's for me still a risk. And you know what, the way I'm looking at this, we are like, if you think about humanity as a human body, if some parts of your body, your knee or your leg is not working, I'm going to feel it. So and we are very connected. We've got this nervous system for society. So it's going to be very important that we collaborate and work together and make sure that in this hyper-connected world, that all parts of humanity, wherever we live, that we help people, upskill people. So there's a huge responsibility on the people that's here, and we are fortunate to have some visionary leadership and people that's making an impact and difference, but we need a lot more of that. And we need assistance from the global communities, from the developed company environments as well. But I think it is a opportunity where something like Sapiens, where you use blockchain and you use all these kind of smart technologies to actually provide the environment where we can fast track things as well. I think on the African continent or other emerging markets, education is hugely important. So, and I've seen where governments are wasting money and not spending it in areas that matter and make a difference. And I also have one of the NTP goals where I talk about population growth and decline. We need to have a balance. If you want quality of life, you can't have excessive growth, but you also don't want decline. So you need to balance that as well and look at quality. So yeah, no, it's a very, very topical, important question.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate all of you being here, and just a reminder that our next webinar will be held this Thursday on social and sustainable finance, research and teaching, and all of the slides and recordings will be sent to everyone either later today or early tomorrow. So we appreciate all of you being here and your wonderful questions, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very
much. Thank you.
again sometime. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.